Hi everybody, it's Franny, and today you join me for part 8 of the Beck Spyder. Today we're going to be sorting this fuel system here. This is just not good. We have a fuel pump here and a fuel filter here, but it's got like almost a kink here. There's another kink down the line a little bit. But the worst part, in my opinion, is this plastic fuel tubing, which already has kinks and bends in it in a couple of different places, but it's the bit that goes all the way from the front through the tunnel all the way to the back. So we're going to be replacing that with actual real live fuel line, which would be great, but it's going to be a little bit of a thing. Getting it through the bulkhead in the back is going to be difficult, and getting it up front. So that's what's up for today. We're going to try and sort this fuel system and make it a little less dangerous. A tour of the original fuel system here. This is the base of the fuel tank itself. Notice no clamp on that line. Then as it comes out, it goes across the top of the torsion tubes there and ends up at the fuel pump itself. The fuel pump is then connected to a fuel filter. Notice the kink down at the bottom, and then out of the fuel filter into a hard tube. And then this bit here where it just goes around in a U, this is the line going into the tunnel from the front of the car. And this is the line from going through the tunnel all the way to the back firewall here, this plastic line, and then exits out the back here. So we're now in the engine compartment. The tube itself, you can see, is a bit chafed. It's been moving around in there, and it's kind of a mess. It's not really locked down. And look at that kink. And it goes up above the rear torsion bar there and heads up to the fuel filter that's actually in the back. Now this is the whole setup from the end of the tube into the filter, then through another tube, then through a series of connections, and then into the main braided line that goes into the carburetor. I'm going to start by removing the line from the tank. I just want to stop our fuel at the source. There's no way to really do this other than to pull this off and stick something in there and clamp it off. I'm going to use just a regular screwdriver to do that. That should be good enough. Then we're going to pull all these bits apart, drain our gas out as best we can. I need to get the gas out of this plastic fuel line as well that's running all the way back. I don't want it to dribble gas all the way through the tunnel as I pull it through and all that. So anyway, here we go. There we go. All right, good. Okay, we expected a bit of a mess, not the end of the world though. And clamp that off and just put it up here for safekeeping, get it out of the way. Now I'm just going to start disassembling this all mess here. To drain the gas from the line all the way through the tunnel, I'm going to disconnect it here and pour it into my little jar here. So let's go ahead and loosen this clamp up.
Tomorrow.
We start again the next morning. Yesterday was a complete and utter nightmare. I had to get this plastic fuel line all the way out of the car from the tunnel and replace it. Now the problem is, you can see it's like kinked in different places and crimped, and it's a mess. And then it was connected to this thing, and it was twisted around and completely kinking this off, plus the line just pulled out of this connector right here as well. It was a complete and utter mess. So this was just a big old fire hazard waiting to happen. So what I wanted to do was replace it with just normal fuel tubing. That makes sense, right? So this is nice big fat fuel tubing. We could run it all the way from the front to the back. Everything would be great. So I started in the back and I started working my way forward, but I hit a bulkhead, and that bulkhead only had a hole in it large enough for this black tube, and you can see they're just completely different sizes. There was no way this was going through. And I thought, well, maybe I can just drill it out, make it a little bit bigger, but that's a structural member going all the way across, and I didn't want to put a big hole in it right in the center. I just didn't want to weaken it. It just bothered me. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I just replace it with some metal tubing instead? And ended up with this, which is the same diameter as this black tube, or very close. It's actually a little bit bigger, but pretty close. important bit is it would fit through the hole. So that's great. So I started in with that. I thought, you know, I'll just use the old one. I'll attach this to it and pull it through. It'll be great. So what I did was split this a little bit, crimped it down, pushed it into the copper tubing, and then wrapped it around with tape. And I thought that'll be great. It was connected on the end like that, and it would just go straight through. Should be perfect, right? That hole, seriously, would not allow this bit of tape. It just got kind of stuck on it. So that was a real problem, and I ended up not being able to get it through. So I still had to replace this line, still need to get this through, but the problem is if I can't sight it, I can't get through the tunnel into the forward firewall. So how do you fix that? Well, I have this, which is a piece of piano wire. It's about 4 feet long, long enough to go all the way through the tunnel, which is great. So I went through that first bulkhead right in front of the seats and went all the way up, and then when I hit the firewall, boink, there was supposed to be there's a little hole there, but I couldn't find it. I mean, I sat there and pointed away about 50 times, couldn't find it. Just kept going and going and going. It was like 15 minutes I was doing this, and I just could not get it through the hole on the other side. Until I thought about it, you know what? I just need to locate it and grab it. How can I grab it? How about a little magnet? That's perfect. So I stuck the little magnet through the hole. This thing gets pretty long actually, until I found the end of this. And then I was able to coax it through the hole. Okay, once this was through the hole like this, then I could slide my copper tubing over the end like this and push it all the way through. And that worked great. I was able to locate it, get it through. Then my only last deal was to get the metal rod out from inside the tubing, which was a bit of a bear, but I managed to get it out. So now we have our metal tubing running all the way from the front, all the way through all the bulkheads, all the way to the back. So that was what yesterday was all about, and it was a complete and utter nightmare, but it's all done. So let me run you through what we're going to do for today. We still have our fuel pump up here that we have to mount. I have a line coming off the gas tank that I'm not happy about at all. It's this guy up here. It's an old cloth line. It's deteriorating. And the other side of it that goes into the gas tank doesn't even have a clamp on it or anything. And boy, if that line breaks, snaps, whatever, it's going to dump the entire contents of the tank into the front of the car. That could be a little bit of a fire hazard. So what I want to do is replace that line to the pump. Then from our pump, we used to have a filter up here. I'm going to disconnect the filter. I don't want the filter up here. I'm going to go straight from that to our line that goes through the tunnel. Now the filter is going to be relocated to the back where we can get to it easily to replace it. And also you want your filter at the end of the line, not at the beginning of the line. You want it to catch all possible places where it could get any crud in it and I don't know, any slothing on anything that's going to get into the lines. You want it right before the carburetors. So that's where it's going to be in the back. So we just have this guy to mount and a bit of fuel tubing, but let me show you what we're going to do in the back. I pulled the fuel line apart a bit just to kind of double check this. This looks completely janky to me to get from here to here. But the problem is that these connectors are kind of weird. This is a rubber tubing and these connectors aren't like pressure fittings or anything. They require the other end of it to actually insert into the rubber in this. So it's not like you can really just sort of screw something like this guy on the end of it and it just won't seal. So I don't know, none of this really works for me, but it's okay. As long as it doesn't leak, I think I'll be happy. It just needs to go down, sort of down to the filter. That's its only job. So let me go ahead and tighten these guys back up a little bit and we'll reinstall this and get this ready for our filter. Really quick about fuel line. So I was at the auto parts store and picked up some fuel line from them. And there was a guy there who said, you know, you have to be very careful about the types of fuel lines with the fuels and things that we have. This says right on it, it says fuel line. PVC, EEC, but really what this is more for evaporative control. So this really shouldn't be used for fuel line. Now this fuel line here, which is a little bit different, is used for fuel line. So this is, it's called Barricade is the trade on it, the trade name on it. And the other important thing to notice on this is going to be a little bit hard. I'll see if I can get a good picture of this. Let's see, so can you see in there that there's like a center tube that's pressed inside of the outer rubber tube? It's a little bit different. You can kind of just barely see it. That's what you want to look for, is that internal tube that's inside this tube. And these barricade tubes are better because they can handle the alcohol and the fuel. These guys are really not, they're made for fuel vapor, but not really for fuel. Another thing is this is very flexible and easy to work with. This is quite a bit stiffer actually, probably because of that center piece. Now both of these I believe are made by Gates. Let's see, does this say? Yep, Gates. And this is also Gates. So they're both made by the same manufacturer, but this is the one you really want. Now for carburetor stuff here too, we're dealing with much lower pressure, fuel pressure. I mean, shoot fire, we're below 5 psi. So a lot of this fuel tubing says not for fuel injection because that would be super duper high pressure. But just something to know about fuel lines, very, very important. Always look, if you don't know and you can't quite remember or whatever, just try to remember to look at the end of it and see if you can see that inner tube. Here's our metal fuel line as it's coming out of the back of the tunnel here. And then it's going to route up this way. I want to keep it away from this exhaust system as much as possible there. You can see it on the other side of that big steel, the torsion tube up there. Back here behind the battery, we have a screw mount back here that I believe we can use to mount our fuel filter. So what I'm hoping is that I can mount this guy here, and we can come in from this side, go out on this side, and that should work a lot better than that other filter that's remember this was just back here sort of flopping around back here, this thing. It was just sort of flopping around, could go anywhere. It was sitting on top of this thing. That's just not good. Here's where we ended up. Our usual metal fuel line that we had before snakes down to the fuel filter, which is behind the battery down at the base there, and the line out the back goes down into the tunnel. Next step's going to be to plumb in our fuel pump. I'm going to leave some extra fuel tubing in there actually to give me a little bit of clearance. This thing is really hard to get out with the wheel on the car, so I think it's a lot better if you have a little extra fuel line, then you can disconnect it and pull it out and deal with the connections instead of having to work in this little well up here, which is really hard to get to. And there's the new copper line in the front that we can connect to with our pump. Go ahead here and slide our fuel tubing over the copper line going into the tunnel. All right, great. Okay, there we go. Now I want to clamp this down. There we go, good and tight. Good and tight. Sort of pull on it a little bit, make sure it's good and tight. Now we just want to remember this is our line out into the tunnel, so we'll take the out on the pump and connect it here. The final line we want to put in is the one from the actual gas tank. Now this is going to be a bit tricky. The line that's actually in there, I've been smelling gas the whole time when I'm working here, and if I put my finger underneath it, I can definitely smell some gas. So that line has got to be replaced, and I've got a new line for it, that's great, but I want to put it on the pump first, because once I take it off the tank, there's no valve or anything, so it's just going to come flying out. So this, I'm going to have to kind of be careful about this, I think. I'm all set. I've got my new fuel line ready to go. I got the clamp sitting on it. It's positioned kind of close to where I can get it. I have the fire extinguisher at the ready, and if I really get into trouble, I've got my walkie-talkie for Heidi. So this is just kind of a deal because short of draining the entire tank, there's really no way to do this when it's live. I think I can get it off and get it. It's just going to spurt a little bit of gas. I've got a big towel in here. Should be okay. I guess we'll see. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's loose. Get my other one ready to go here. Wanted to not forget my safety glasses. That line, there it is. Oh, that wasn't that bad. There we go. Simple enough. Well, that wasn't bad at all. Let me get the clamp on it. Okay. Yeah, that's good and tight. All right, fabulous. I'm gonna dry things off a little bit here and just be certain we are good. This is the old line that was in there. It was one of these old cloth braided lines, and it was weeping, and I think there's some cracks in the end of it as well. So this tube, this fuel line definitely needed to be replaced. So I'm really glad we did. You know, not to mention, it didn't have a clamp on it either. It was just sort of sitting on the little teat out of the tank. And it wasn't that hard to get off. All I had to do was wiggle it back and forth a few times and it came right off. So I thought it was going to be a pain. I put a pair of pliers on it and stuff. I was like, no, it's turning. And then wiggle, wiggle, and it just about fell off. Super duper scary. So this is the idea. We wanted to make sure that we had enough fuel on both sides that we could get to the pump and get it out so that we can service it here instead of trying to service it inside the car, inside this well here. It's dark, it's difficult. This is a narrow passage and difficult to get in and out of. Easier if you can just sort of unhook the pump and then go ahead and get it out and then deal with it. So another thing was the wiring on this. So we've got these spade connectors on these things here, and sure enough, the very first time I pulled this thing out, the positive wire just went poof right out of the back of the spade connector. I mean, I didn't even pull on it. It just sort of almost fell out. And then as I was fixing that, I moved the negative, and the negative wire pulled out. So both wires I had to put new connectors on as well. So oh my God, so I know this seems like a big deal and I made a big fuss about doing the fuel system on this car, but it was a disaster at pretty much every junction. So I'm really hoping it's gonna be a lot safer and a lot more reliable as well. It's the moment of truth. I'm gonna turn on the pump and we're gonna check each and every one of our connections. I've got Heidi way over here. She is looking at the line at the very end. So we want to make sure that the gas goes all the way through, and she's got it sitting over a jar. So she'll let me know as we fill up the entire system. I'm going to be walking around double checking everything to make sure that we don't have any leaks anywhere. Okay, here we go. Key on. Here's our pump ticking away here. Do we see anything? Everything look good under there? Looks good. Is it? Okay.
Like nowish. Some of the jars are filling up very quickly.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Looks like we've got lots of fuel at the other end. Heidi said we're all full. So I'm going to go ahead and reattach that last line so we can pressurize the system. That'll give us a much better indication if everything is holding pressure. Now that we have fuel through the entire system, now is the pressure test. So I'm going to have Heidi go ahead and turn it on, and I'm going to double check all of our connections. All right, Heidi, go ahead. Okay. System is building pressure. Looks good here. These two connections at the pump look dry. A little hard to see our one down here. I can feel it though. It's down here. Feels dry as well. And our tank looks good up there as well. So let's check back at the carburetors. This one's dry. This was the one I was the most worried about. We took this off. We have our line that comes down here. Holy cow, lots of connections down here. We have our filter, each side of the filter here, and then this side here. Good. I'm not smelling or seeing any gas at all. This all looks very good and dry. Our last connection we need to double check is the one all the way down here that came through the tunnel. So that's nice and dry as well. So I think we're good here. Everything seems really good. No leaks anywhere. I have the pump completely refitted. You can see a little bit of our extra line there which is great. I have the wiring tied up as well. So we are all set. I think that's it for the fuel system. Woohoo! Next up is to put the wheel back down, car back on all fours again, and we're going to start it and see how it runs. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that I was very surprised that Heidi called time when it was filling up at the back there, when she was filling up the jar, because it was sort of basically trickling out before, and I just figured the pump didn't have a lot of flow. It went out quite a bit faster, which means we have less restrictions. That old fuel filter could have been clogged, all sorts of things. So completely new fuel system all the way through. I think we have a good chance that this car is actually going to run well and consistently. Well, the moment of truth, remember we went through and tuned it, so it should actually kind of do its thing. We just want to verify that all the systems are working properly. Got Heidi over here with the fire extinguisher, so she's safety girl, so she's going to be keeping an eye on things as well. All right, here we go. All right, contact. Pretty cold. We haven't run for a couple of days. So there we go. Look at that. Holding an idle too, huh? Who would have thought we'd actually get here? Isn't that something? Wow. Let's take a quick look at all of our fuel lines. Make sure we're still dry everywhere. Nice and dry here. Down here, we're nice and dry as well. Okay. Nice and dry here. And our fuel line all the way down at the bottom there looks good too. There's our fuel pump. Everything looks happy under there as well. Well, that's amazing. Listen to that idle. That's just great. I think that sounds awesome. Woohoo! Well, I think we've got the fuel system sorted. I think we have the engine running well. It seems to be tuned pretty well. It came up and it's idling all on its own now. I'd love to take it for a spin, but as fate would have it, believe it or not, it's been raining a bit today, raining on and off, and there's literally no cover for this car, and I don't want to take it out in the rain. So that'll have to be for next time. Well, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm super excited and super psyched. So if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Questions or comments, leave them down below, and I'll get right to them. We still have a few more episodes here, so don't leave us. We need to completely detail the car, and we're going to take it out and do a proper review, and then finally we're going to compare it against the 356, so stay tuned for all that. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, safe travels. Bye!